It's one step away from saying that the best boss is the friends we made along the way.
That's exactly what I was going for. Yeah.
Obviously, Daryl, last time I spoke to you, not counting the interview we did that recorded very badly, but last time I spoke to you in a way that was fit for public consumption, we were talking about your first book, The Making of Tomb Raider, which I can see behind you there. But you've now got a new book, 50 Years of Boss Fights. And I wonder if a good place to start might be, what are like your earliest memories of bosses in games?
So the first one that sticks to mind is going to a neighbor's house and seeing a Sega Master System for the first time and seeing Alex Kidd. Now, we did speak about this in your podcast last year about the nightmarish frog, and and that was kind of like pretty much kind of like one of the bosses that I first remember really, and it was just really creepy as well. So that was a big one. The other one was Sonic because I feel like it's such a common thing really where you're running across a level as Sonic. Everything seems to be hunky dory. It's all great. You're running through Green Hill, and then at the end of Act 3, bam, you've got Robotnik. The music changes. You got to like use different skills to beat him, and that was kind of like a scary moment for my 5-year-old self, and it's not really changed since.
Yeah, I think for a lot of people of a similar age to us would have a very early Robotnik memory.
Yeah.
And I don't know about you, but I didn't get particularly far through Sonic in my childhood. I've only
Eh?
in my later life I've seen some of the the levels that I could never reach at the time.
Yeah.
Um, I wonder what inspired you to want to write a book about bosses.
Yeah, sure. So this was during my finishing up of the Making of Tomb Raider. So I was just catching up with the developer of the first two games, Gavin Rummery. He created the room editor and a bunch of other things in the games. And we were speaking about the bosses in the first Tomb Raider game, and he said about how with the final boss, Natla, the antagonist, where you go to a pyramid, it's all falling apart because you've got the ski on, or Laura's got the ski on, and you face Natala in this huge room, and you shoot her a few times. She gets up, you shoot her again, you go on the slope, and that's it. And he was like, that was just because we ran out of time. And to be honest, Rob, I mean, like, risking myself because there is a community out there. I mean, I never really rated the bosses in Tomb Raider. Maybe you could like maybe rate the T-Rex in the first game. But yeah, there wasn't really anything memorable. So it got me thinking about what a memorable boss is. And it just kind of went from there, really. And I was kind of looking into like what the first ever boss was. I thought it was something to do with maybe Space Invaders or Pac-Man. It wasn't. It was like even before that. And yeah, it just kind of went from there. And that was end of 2020, I believe. So yeah, it's been a long time coming.
Definitely, definitely. It's a great book, and I'm going to do one benefit of us having to re-record this is the fact that I can now do the book, and I've got it right here. I can do the Graham
There it
Norton
is.
thing of holding up the book. And yeah, when I've read it, the very first chapter after the intro, like you say, it's about the very first boss battle with these kind of screenshots that would take you back to the ancient past. How did you uncover that story of the first ever boss battle, and how did you end up reaching out to the guys? I bet they were quite happy to talk about it after 50 years.
Yeah, I mean, a big factor of why it's taken a few years to get this book together is because I didn't want this book to just be like a simple list book, like where you just read a book about like the A to B's of bosses and then that's it, and then you get on with your day. I wanted to be different. I wanted to stand out, so I wanted a lot of interviews in there. Not every boss has an interview. I kind of like the fact that as you read through the book, you're almost like kind of surprised that you come across an interview in a certain boss. And that's kind of like I say, like what led to the first boss. I wanted it to start with the first boss and also the two people involved. And I remember when I first got in touch with them, they were a bit taken aback because they kind of knew that the Golden Dragon was the first boss, but they didn't really think that they would still be talking about it like 50 years later because it was 1974. And it was great. I mean, it was such a good chat with them. And so much so that I don't really think I've edited much out of it because I just feel like there's so much in there to grasp. And because it's the first boss, so it's definitely one of the longest bosses in the book, but I feel like it's justified. I'm not sure if you feel the same about that, Rob.
No, I would say 100%. And it sets the tone as well that you're going to get a lot of depth and insight throughout the book.
Good.
But yeah, the thing that really struck me about it is it's almost like a time capsule kind of effect, because it's like you wouldn't necessarily, people who are like much younger than us probably won't remember games that feel that retro and old fashioned, but to think like that's what games used to look like, and like the story of them, like, isn't it them having to like go back and forth between different college campuses to like get the game running in different places and to fix it, and how they had to keep like going in and tweaking it because it was getting too easy, people had worked it out and stuff like that. And actually that's still, apart from the having to carry a massive storage thing around, apart from that, it's pretty similar challenges that I think developers have now, of like, how do we get this boss to the right amount of challenging and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think that was really the aim. Like, I wanted to kind of see how bosses have evolved from 1974, because I mean, I'd argue like before that Elden Ring, I mean, when that came out, I was writing the book, and before, I mean, when you thought about bosses like after the 2000s, there wasn't really a massive deal that stuck out to me. I mean, because it felt like the term bosses kind of fell off a cliff slightly in gaming, and games like Dark Souls and and Elden Ring kind of like almost revived the feeling of bosses, which I thought was great. And I just kind of wanted to highlight like what were the best like before it, really. But don't get me wrong, there's a few bosses that I do mention after the 2000s, as you know, Rob. So there's a couple of Metal Gear bosses, for instance.
Yeah, definitely, like, knowing you as well as I do, I can definitely tell that you've written it. But that's the beauty of it, though, because it's like, if, like you say, if it's just a generic list book, it could almost be like, oh, well, anyone could have written this, or it could have been written by a committee, or by like each person writes a different boss or something. But because it's your version of a boss book, you get your kind of your spin on it and your personal favorites and stuff like that, which I think makes it, like you say, a bit more unique. But I was wondering, how did you decide what makes it into the book, what doesn't make it into the book, how many bosses to have in there, and stuff like that?
Well, first, a great difficulty because there's quite a few games that's been out since 1974, and yeah, it took a while. So I have this newsletter called Springboard, and I kind of like spoke about how I kind of came to this. And at the beginning, it was 100 bosses because I thought that'd be a nice thing, like 100 bosses over the past 50 years. But then I thought, well, I'll still be writing this in 2025 if I was still doing 100 bosses. And I thought, well, it's going to be approaching 50 years at the time in 2020. And I thought, well, 50 be a good number, I think. And then I put it to 51 because as I was writing up a Pokemon boss, spoilers, I thought, back in the day, you used to have like 151 Pokemon, with like the super secret, Pokemon of Mew. And then, with Gold and Silver, even though it was 100 new Pokemon, it was still 251, and it had Celebi. And I thought that'd be a nice thing as well. So I just did 51, and here we are. But yeah, with deciding the bosses, it was a challenge because I made like a secret mission to play as many games as I could with all these bosses and stuff. And also going to go into certain games that I would have never have played before myself, but knowing about certain iconic bosses. Undertale is a great example, which I now regard as an incredible classic. And it was just really kind of amazing just to kind of get this eclectic collection of bosses. And there were a few that I got that cut out, but there were some that I was kind of deciding against. I mean, for example, there was Tekken. So at the time, there were 7 mainline games, a couple of spin-offs like Tekken Tag and stuff. And I thought, well, there is a memorable boss in there. There's plenty. And at the start, it was going to be Tekken 1 because you had to beat Hayachi in a certain way in order to play as him. And I thought that'd be a great thing. It's anxiety-inducing. But I decided on Tekken 2 because I just thought the setting, the music, even when you got the screen where it says, your character versus Kazooie, I just thought, oh, that's just a really kind of great boss setup. So yeah, it was great difficulty, but I like to think I have covered a lot of it anyway. But I do apologize if your favorite one isn't in there.
That is one of the things I was going to say, is that now that the book is out, have you started to get people coming to you in a rage being, I can't believe you haven't included X, Y, and Z boss that I really like?
You know what? It's surprising actually. Like I've been trying to kind of been preparing for it ever since I decided to do this book. And so far some of the comments has been interesting. They've said about oh, I'm really surprised that you put this boss in because I don't think anyone's really heard of this one. And I thought, oh, that's great to know. That's great to hear. And also, I'd hear stuff like, oh, I didn't know you could do this with this certain boss, which is like a Metal Gear thing. So that's been really nice so far. It's been really good. So yeah, it's been really nice so far.
Oh, nice, nice. And what do you think in all this research that you've done, what do you think are like the ingredients that make a good boss battle? Like you mentioned it being anxiety inducing and having like good music and stuff. Are there like certain things you're looking for to like really rate a boss encounter?
Yeah, I mean, it depends really with a boss because I think for one that has to be memorable. I mean, I feel like the music has to be unique. And I also feel like it has to be an example of the skills that you've learned in the game so far. And, Metal Gear Solid is an amazing example of that. I mean, you have to use certain weapons in order to get rid of a certain boss. And by the time you've reached the end of Metal Gear Solid 1, you've used every weapon and almost every item manageable because, that's how you're able to beat them. So I think that's important too, like certain items, but making sure that the game has allowed you to kind of try every avenue and method, but making it fun. It should be challenging, but kind of like, and you'll like this, Rob, but kind of like the Pringles one more Pringles effects, of like, you're beaten, you've died or whatever, it's game over, but you just can't resist that one more go, just
Yeah.
like a Pringle. So I feel like
Once
that's
you
the
pop,
thing.
you just can't stop. That's the thing.
Absolutely. So yeah, that was a big thing as well. And yeah, I think that's really kind of the main things with the boss. But I have to say, I mean, I do stretch it a bit with the term boss because I think when someone thinks of a boss, they do think of Dr. Robotnik or Metal Gear or something else. And
Oh,
there are a few like deviations that I've kind of made in the book. There's a certain Star Wars one, which features an interview in there. And I was really pleased to talk to him. And I just thought the whole level of that, and that's I'm not going to spoil it anymore, but I just felt like that whole thing was a boss fight, and I thought it was so interesting. So yeah, that was kind of what I was getting at, really.
yeah. It's interesting. One of the things that comes across reading the book is that I know you're very interested in like I think we would call them like inflection points, maybe like when gaming goes from 2D to 3D or when it goes from 3D into open world, like those kind of like
Yeah.
moments that have kind of changed like the structure of games, I guess. But it's interesting because like as games have got more advanced, then like the boss battles kind of have to get more engaged. I think of like Mario 64 when it's okay, well now that it's in 3D, you have to kind of spin
Mm,
Bowser around and throw him off the edge and stuff like that. Was that
yeah.
interesting for you to like to look through it as like almost like a historical thing of like, oh, now that they had this technology, bosses became a bit more like this and stuff like that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Mario 64 is a great example because, like, I think what a lot of people forget is like the analog stick on the N64 controller was a huge deal at the time. I mean, I'm sure it was before like Sony brought out their analog controller for the Sony PlayStation. So being able to use an analog stick to control Mario, but control him at certain points where he could walk, he would be able to run at certain speeds. And then, yeah, when you get to Bowser, you're rotating that stick to throw him across the stage. I mean, that was just mind blowing for the time. And it may or may not feature an interview in that certain one. Um, but yeah, I mean, yeah, is such an amazing example of like how it made that successful jump from 2D to 3D. And I tried to highlight it as well. I did try to do it with Sonic, but it just didn't make the book. I just thought, when you get to the 3D Sonics, for instance, I mean, you do kind of feel like there's a bit of struggle as to what kind of happened there with Sega and
Yeah,
Sonic Adventure and the bosses. So that was kind of like a cut boss there. But yeah, Mario was just such a great example because I go into another Mario boss like, a couple of generations ahead, which again takes advantage of the hardware there. So yeah, amazing.
yeah, and like you say with Sonic, like there's enough really memorable bosses in the first few games. I think it's okay to not like force in a 3D one because
Yeah.
you've got various. I can think of at least two Sonic ones that are in there. I think so. I
Mhm.
think Sonic fans will be fine.
Yeah.
And I think that most people know that yeah, the 3D ones kind of are a bit of a mixed bag.
Mm.
They tried with what was that recent one, Frontiers? Remember they tried to like make bosses a thing in that, but Sometimes they were quite interesting, but I just remember falling off, and then you have to kind of start the whole thing again from
Same.
the ground.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess there's one thing I did want to ask you. I don't know if I gave you enough warning for you to have fully prepared for this, but I was wondering if you have a personal favorite, like top five best boss battles.
Oh, you're asking someone who's just written a book on 51 bosses. Right. Okay. Right.
Now
Oh,
5.1.
5.1. Oh, right. Okay. So I think I think one of them has to be a Metal Gear boss because I just felt like with almost every game, Hideo Kojima like did something that took advantage of the capabilities of the console at the time, whether it was Psycho Mantis with Port 2 or Metal Gear Solid 3 is the end and the Eternal Clock. But yeah, definitely Psycho Mantis is going to be one because I remember the first time I played that in 99, I think, and not knowing what the hell I was doing. And even then, there was a playground rumor that if you hit the statues in a certain way in this office, you'll be able to kill Psycho Mantis. I've never been able to do it. I think you can in the GameCube remake, but after like you keep bothering Colonel Campbell on the codec, you put the control into port 2, and it's because apparently Psycho Mantis is reading port 1, and it blew my mind. It was amazing. And even now it's fantastic. So that's one. The second one. See, the thing is, I don't want to kind of like bring up bosses that might be in the book as well. Maybe like curveball, just in case. So I think another one. Let's see. I think one could be actually. This may or may not be in the book. Is Anubis in Zone of the Enders. It's another Konami game directed by Hideo Kojima, and people remember this game as it had the demo of Metal Gear Solid 2 packaged with it, called Zone of the Enders. Amazing, like mech game. It was so good for its time. It was one of the first games I bought with my PS2 in 2001. It wasn't just for the demo of Metal Gear Solid 2, mind. But at the end, after you've kind of built up your mech and you've got everything, then you're ready to go. You fight off against this final boss called Anubis. And if you've ever seen like the anime, like Dragon Ball Z, where it gets to a point in a fight where one of the protagonists is trying to fight the antagonist for that saga, and he just cannot reach them, hit them, whatever. You just keep missing them, and it's exactly the same with Anubis. It's that unwinnable boss, which I just thought was amazing because you just thought, oh, maybe there is something that I'm missing, and I tried every single weapon and every dodge, every counter, and it didn't work. And then finally, a cutscene played where he just flies off, and I think, oh, right, okay, that's the end of the game. So slightly anticlimactic, but memorable in the fact that it was the concept of an unwinnable boss, which I just thought was just, yeah, amazing. This one actually, so this is an interesting one because hopefully it's coming into the collection that was announced in Nintendo Direct, the Capcom Classics with Marvel vs. Capcom, Marvel Superheroes vs. Street Fighter. So I think it is Marvel Superheroes versus Street Fighter. And the reason I didn't put this boss in was because he's already in another section in the book. And it's Mecha Akuma, which is just amazing. So I'm only going with from memory because that's been a few years. But apparently, if you beat the game with no continues and a certain time limit with a certain score, you get this Akuma who has kind of like borrowed the robotics of, I think it's like Apocalypse from Marvel Comics. And it's just ridiculous. I mean, so much so that he's so fast and he's doing all these like mid-air Hadoukens like in quick succession. And you can beat him, but oh man, with great difficulty. But again, I'm sure I mean, to me anyway, I could be wrong here, but it's definitely got that Pringles effect, that one more time, because he's brutal, but it really kind of tests your might, which is a huge thing. So that's another memorable one. Right, I'm up to 3. I've got 2 more. So let's see. So I think, oh yeah, right. I'll talk about this one. So Ganon in the first Breath of the Wild. So during the second edit of bosses, and I was mulling whether to replace this boss because it is in the book with the boss from Breath of the Wild 2. And I was mulling it because I just thought, the sequel is so good in every which way and improves upon it in ways you didn't think was possible before. But I stayed with Breath of the Wild 1 for a few reasons. Is the fact that because it's the first game, the first Breath of the Wild, and you're facing Ganon, and you're just facing it in the open fields of Hyrule. I just felt like it was so amazing for 2017 and the launch of a Switch as well. I just thought it was amazing. And this got cut out of the book, but it's also memorable for me because when I first faced against Ganon, and you're meant to be on a horse. My horse just ran off, and I couldn't face Ganon at all. And I don't know whether like you remember this, Rob, or anyone who's listening, but there's a scene in The Simpsons, right? And you know me, Rob, I'm good for Simpsons references, where Krusty is like had his show cancelled because I think it's from Gabbo or something. And he's betting on a horse, and he's trying to get this horse to win on the sidelines at the racetrack. And he's like, come on, go, run. And he's not being shown with this horse, but he's just not doing anything. Krusty's like, run, please. No, don't come over here. And you just see the horse come into frame when he licks his face. And that just reminded me of my time with Ganon the first time Breath of the Wild. So where everyone's like kind of praising this end boss, oh, it's so good. I just have my Simpsons moment where the horse runs off into the distance. And I'm thinking, well, that's it now. Hyrule's gone. So yeah, that was a memorable time for me. So there we are. So the last one. It's always the last one. Let's see. So I've done Zed the Enders, Metal Gear, the horse.
The horse was the real boss.
The horse was the friend we made along the way. So right, this is an interesting one. So this is one that I was mulling to include in the book, but I held against it because I just felt like it could be its own like only unique section of a book that could be like 10, 15 pages. And I don't know whether it's corny or cheesy. I still don't know to this day, but I've been thinking about it like for 2 years and I'm not sure. I don't think like you know this, Rob, either. So one of the ideas I had for a boss was again a deviation from it, which was the second player, which is like multiplayer. So like when like you're facing off against someone, like whether it's an online match in like a first-person shooter, or you're facing off against someone in like say Fortnite, and you're down to the last two, and you're about to win like that match. And I felt like the boss is like that player because you get so much anxiety, but you also get so much unpredictability as well. Because it isn't a computer you're facing, all you're facing against is a human player. Maybe up to a point with lag as well, but yeah, I kind of cut it out because I just thought there's so much you could do with that because it kind of goes to, like I say, it could be Fortnite, it could be even Sea of Thieves, it could be Tekken, it could be like something else. So I left it out, but yeah, but definitely to me, like I left it, but yeah, I just felt like that was a memorable one to have. I don't know whether that's cheesy or a cop out, but yeah.
No, I like that. And it makes me think of like PvP in Elden Ring is sometimes harder than PvE in Elden Ring. I've learned recently, and also it makes me think of the Pokemon Gold and Silver one you alluded to earlier, where it's like the greatest boss is like yourself. It's like your yourself that you have to like. Yeah, it's like your Gen 1 version of yourself that you have to fight at the end of the game. Yeah, it's one step away from saying that the best boss is the friends we made along the way.
That's exactly what I was going for. Yeah, yeah, definitely. So that's why I scrapped it. But yeah, maybe I could put it in the newsletter one day at Springboard. Who knows? But yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, it feels like there's something in that. But yeah, that is the book. 50 Years of Boss Fights. It's out now. Get your copy, and I'll put the link to Pen and Sword, the publisher, in the description. And I will also chuck in the link to Daryl very graciously let us publish the first chapter of the book. We've got an excerpt of that on the site, all about the game we were talking about earlier, D&D, with the Golden Dragon, the first ever boss battle, which is a story I had never heard even slightly before. And that's like it's worth checking out the book just for that. But you can have the excerpt and then check out the rest of the book after that. And thank you very much for taking the time. And hopefully we won't have to record this for a third time because of audio.
Hopefully not, no. Definitely. Thank you, Rob. It's been good.
Awesome. Thank you, mate.